Thank you, everybody, for joining in to the third workshop organized by the Debate Central, Global Speech and Debate Council, DWA, and Audio Podium. We are going to be discussing how you go ahead and do actor motions in parliamentary debates and how you engage with different sort of like ambits around actor motions. This will typically be understanding how actor motions operate, what kind of stakeholders burdens that you have, how actors perceive things in debates, and what kind of perspectives do you expect in, say, actor motions. The second thing that we'll be doing as part of this workshop is simply having like a live activity session where we discuss a couple of motions at the end so that all of you get some hands-on practice also about everything that we've discussed as constructive material throughout the entire hour. We'll not prolong it a lot. So hopefully by 40 minutes, 52 minutes to an hour, we'll be done with our entire workshop. Right. So actor motions are predominantly very, very specific to certain periods or certain individuals in terms of how we have those actors operating in different systems, right? So an actor motion is basically where you have been given an entity where you're supposed to be debating from or on the idea of whose the debate framework has to be based on. What do I essentially mean by this? It essentially means that you have a perspective of how this individual actor is focused in terms of this particular theme or in this particular framework of the motion. So, an actor motion can have different structures. For example, typical phrasing for actor motions are like this house as actor A or actor B would like to do X, or this house as actor would support, oppose, regret, or believes that any of those forms of motion structures that we usually find, right? Actor motions, however, become very different in terms of the nuanced way in which you're approaching motions because you're not really debating as any sort of government entity or structure, but rather the government through the perspective or lens of this actor and how this actor is operating within the status quo within the world and what is the benefits or interests of that actor within that motion, right? So, what we essentially mean here is that understanding the actor's motivations or understanding the interests of the actor becomes paramount in terms of how you're viewing or addressing actors' motions in debates. And this essentially looks very different for different gambits, right? Because some actors might be specific individuals, some actors might be countries, some actors might be specific international institutions. So all of these will have different ways in which you are approaching these aspects of how you are like going to be debating or how you're going to be sort of addressing different issues or different burdens within the motion. So an actor motion with a country, for example, as the actor, would have a very different burden fulfillment than, say, a motion which has institution as an actor or a specific person as an actor. Now, in principle, when we are utilizing, say, an actor's motion's interest, we simply mean that all of the arguments that we are going to be building or constructives that we're going to be building for the case would be on the basis of what are the benefits that are derived for this actor or what are the best practices this actor can engage in or what principally motivates this actor to do something or not do something. It also can be something around the line of a neck case where you are saying what might harm this actor or what might be problematic for this actor, and hence that this actor should not engage in these activities or certain things, right? So, all of these things are very intrinsically important in terms of addressing different aspects, and therefore you become very like cognizant as to how you're approaching different actors on the guise of how that actor is in terms of the way the world operates. You're not looking at general communal good. So basically, if you're going to say that this actor is going to be benefited from a minority perspective of the motion, or say if you're trying to support the minority community or the marginalized, that's not essentially what always would be in the interest of the actor. So you have to be very careful as to how you're tying back those interests rather than, say, talking about the general good of the community. So, for example, let's take a very simple motion, right? So, this house as Trump would delineate economic policy from federal to state level. This can be very simple in terms of understanding how microeconomics and macroeconomics work. But that doesn't necessarily mean that those are the motivations of the actor in this debate, which is essentially the president of the United States or Donald Trump in this particular instance. So Donald Trump has very little like inclinations towards generally following what is good communal principle rather than say more, it is more likely that they will follow what is their own self-interest or what is their own idea of something to be good or bad. So what I essentially mean here is that, for example, if Trump has in the past done certain economic things or had certain economic trends, it is much more likely that he will continue engaging in those trends and continue doing those aspects to do betterment or worse off in terms of the economic factors that are going to be dealing with or dealt with under this motion or the framing of this motion. It is also not about your personal belief systems associated with Trump. For example, somebody might come and tell me that Trump might not be the best actor or the most rational actor because that is my personal belief that he isn't or they aren't. That is again not what is the premise of an actor motion. We are not debating an actor motion on the guise of what are your personal opinions or biases, but rather what are the personal things that interest or motivate the actor. Now, who can be the actor? We did discuss a couple of people who can be actors, right? But let's just expand on them. These can be individuals like political leaders. There might be certain specific CEOs, for example, Sam Altman from OpenAI, Elon Musk of Tesla and PayPal. So all of these people can have motions structured around them. So there are individuals who can be actors in motions. There can be organizations that are actors in motions. For example, NGOs, international bodies like the UN, the European Union, and corporations. And a good example of this is, for example, that you can take Nestle as a corporation and you can say that Nestle's motivations being the framework of how the motion is structured. You can also like base this on the idea of how a UN agency would act, or maybe say NGOs would act like the Human Rights Watch and so on and so forth. An actor can also be a specific state or abstract entities. So this means that, as we gave you an example, this might be the country of the United States, this might be India, this might be somebody else as well, or any regional blocks like ASEAN or other regional entities like SARC and more. Um, these can, however, not just be specific defined people, but can also be like abstract concepts or abstract entities, like which can be treated as actors. So, for example, this can be this house as a scientist, or this can be, for example, this house as a member of the scientific community. So, these can have abstract correlations instead of abject like links towards real or existing individuals. So, you have to be careful in the way in which you're approaching these. All of these do have like different perspectives in how you are approaching these motions and doing, but we'll go on to that in the next segment, right? In the next segment we'll be discussing shortly about how you are analyzing the actor on how essentially are actors going to be like favored in your debate or argument structures. There are certain things that are like very important to understand. So, firstly, we'll have to deconstruct what an actor would be motivated by. So, this can look like things like what is the nature of the actor. For example, if you're a multinational corporation or you're a private entity, your motivations might be profit or shareholder interests. Your nature might be that you are expansionist or you might have capitalistic intentions. So, all of these can be realistic, like expectations that can come out of how you're analyzing the nature of the actor. So if this is, for example, like an individual actor, for example, if you're talking about Donald Trump or Barack Obama, you have very different natures of these two individuals or personalities of these two individuals that you would have sort of the opportunity to deconstruct and ideate around, right? So the first step that you would look at in terms of an actor motion is essentially identifying what are, say, the personal traits or characteristics that an entity or an organization or, say, an individual would exhibit. For example, let's take one more example here. This organization itself, which is organizing these workshops, what can be their motivations to doing so? It might be something that they are interested towards. This might be something that they are not interested, but just randomly doing in terms of a favor for a friend. So these might be motivations that are underlying of that actor, which is something you need to sort of analyze in terms of how they are or how they operate. The second thing is goal setting or understanding what preferences do these actors exhibit. So, what are they trying to achieve? So, are they trying to reach the goal of social sufficiency? Are they trying to reach the goal of power dynamics or political power? Are they trying to reach the narrative of being the best company in the world? So, these things would give you an idea about how to set your own framework or the debate framework, and also give you an idea about how to link back to the burden of the motion by understanding what might be the prior interests of this actor in this particular world as well, right? Now, there might be certain core values or principles. So there might be something like, very simplistically, for example, in Barack Obama's case, they might be a Democrat, so they might have alienations towards how a Democrat operates in the United States political system. They might have the interest of self-preservation. For example, if you're talking about an abstract entity like the scientist, they might be somebody who are interested towards engaging further in the scientific field or contributing meaningfully to the scientific field to have like some sort of valuable exchange or valuable benefit coming to the scientific community. So these are also certain things that you would have to sort of prioritize and focus upon in terms of understanding what are the motivations, what are the desires, and what are the capacities of these actors, and how to sort of approach them and work on them. Now, the next part that you'll sort of see is that there will be certain constraints that an actor is usually operating within, right? So this might simply look like, I am a president of the United States, so I cannot operate beyond the boundaries of the country. I will only have to sort of like look at economic policy within my state. I can't go in and say that Donald Trump has the power as a president of the United States to go and make change in the Indian subcontinent, because they do not have any political powers in this particular state itself. So there might be certain capacity and constraints that they have. This might also look like economic constraints or financial constraints. For example, a multinational corporation like Nestle might not have an abundant amount of economic power, economic sphere of influence. So they will have certain restraints in terms of their actions as part of the motion that you're going to debate around, right? So these couple of things you have to be very careful. Firstly, the nature of the actor, like how are they based or what are they? Are they an individual, group, state, organization? What kind of goals are they prioritizing in terms of maybe profit, power, social dynamics, or what are they essentially trying to achieve? Or thirdly, at how core values or principles are exhibited in terms of this actor. For example, what claims do they stand for? Are they like supporters of a particular political system? Are their preservation interests greater? Are their interest towards capitalism greater? So those things also need to be addressed. And lastly, the capacity and constraints as to how they are utilizing resources that are commonly available to them, and what are their actions limited upon. Is it political power? Is it economic? Or is it something else in terms of how social influence is there for these individuals? So these couple of things would be the first step that you do when analyzing the actor. After you have probably analyzed this actor, the next step that you can do is sort of think about how deep you can go in terms of the history of the actor or other interests of the actor. What do I mean by this? First, you can say, what have been the past motivations or past actions of this actor, which makes it likely that this actor will work in similar ways in the future, right? Now, they might have certain public statements or mission statements. They might have certain motivations which they have exhibited when they are, say, lobbying for political power, or when they have been like a company for a long period of time. So they have acted in a certain capacity or a certain way. So when these sort of like steps are there, you have decent amount of ideas as to how you can go ahead and then contextualize the debate, and then debate on the premise of how this actor would likely act or not act within the motion, right? After that, you can also look at different aspects like context of how this actor is situated. Like if he's situated in the US has a very different dynamic. If he's situated in the India has a very different dynamic. So you have to be careful in analyzing what are the pressures, patterns, and other aspects that are faced by these actors, and what are the motivations behind them. Next, you would probably look at how their prioritization is different on these principles. Like if there is, say, two things that they believe in, what is the order of their belief on things as to what is more, say, subjectively over or beyond the other. Now, we'll take a very short pause here. We'll quickly do an activity so that you can also brainstorm and do certain things around this particular analysis portion. So I'll give you like a small actor. You have to sort of think about what can their motivations be, what kind of priorities would they exhibit. So let's do this small exercise. This house as Google. So this is the first part of the motion framework. this house as Google. So the actor here is very clearly Google, right? So you are supposed to then identify what are the prioritizations or nature of this entity and what are the probable biases or other things that are occurring for this individual. So take a bit of time, and then we can sort of discuss this as an activity as well. Right, there's nothing after that. You're just supposed to analyze the actor itself, which essentially means that what are their motivations, how does this debate be set up, or what is the framework of this debate. So we are only going around analyzing how to go and look at how the actor is or what the actor's motivations are. This is the only stub of the motion. You don't have to go beyond this. So this house is Google is the only part. It's the you don't need to have a motion. We are just now looking at exercises around understanding what kind of motivations does Google have. How do you set up the debate with the idea of Google and how Google is operating or not operating? So ideate with that only. Like take a couple of minutes, think about what can be different aspects that Google might be concerned with. Right. Would anybody want to try? Aditya, Mami, would you want to go ahead and try setting up the framework as to what are the motivations and interests of Google as an actor? It would be more beneficial for you also if you have sort of like an engagement with the idea. Right? Aditya has dropped something on chat. So Google as an actor would be a tech and info powerhouse, probably monopolistic behaviors, multiple industries within tech, so quite influential, economically strong influence over other companies, has an ability to buy out smaller competitions. Yes, good. It's okay if you can't speak. Deepak mentions that they'd prioritize the mental and physical well-being of their employees, as these employees are the backbones of the overall R&D operation. Very good. We do not know what essentially is the motion after as Google. So Google's interests are also sort of what their members would be, how their operations would be, what kind of economic motivations are there, what kind of other motivations are there. Very good. Would anybody else want to contribute? Or we can actually go ahead and do a motion and then we can sort of look at it much more deeper. Okay, seeing that nobody has mentioned anything, I'll just drop in another motion on the chat. We need to look at the inclinations of the actor as in the fan, and then we would sort of look at how the motion is linked back to the inclinations of this actor. Right. Would anybody want to try? The motion is this house, as a fan, would boycott the works of their favorite artist who is found guilty of serious misconduct. Um, so you have to look at what are the inclinations of a fan, what are the relations with their favorite artists, what are the constraints of the motion which are being seen by the fan, and what kind of motivations the fan might have regarding those as well. Anybody, Aditya, Deepak, Amal, Mame, would you want to try? You can unmute, you can type it down, not a problem. Okay, I'll do the motion analysis for you then. The first thing that would be seen here is what kind of interest does a fan have. So the fan has different kind of inclinations, right? They are very susceptible towards having some amount of bias towards their artist. Yes, Aditya, if you want to speak.
So what I was thinking that one of the considerations from the perspective of fan is that we need to understand that exactly what made the fan and how did the fan stumble upon their this favorite artist who they now have to consider boycotting. Is it because that they were pushed into it because of the social circles that they never thought of the actual works the artist did, or even if they are thinking of it, then how is that approach that they're actually analyzing their work, and how in both the circumstances from gov you go ahead and prove that why as to why in both the circumstances that the fan still has to go ahead and boycott the artist because it again it's still wrong, that requires a lot more proving, but then how the stumbling upon works.
True. I think Deepak also mentions one important point. I think Deepak, the only thing that I would do in terms of rephrasing is when you're saying that they would boycott their favorite artists because the moment that they listen to these works, they might have a reminder of what is the bad that the artist might have done or what can trigger them. I think the only point of addition is that we need to be careful in terms of not highlighting our biases because we're not sure if a fan is like somewhat embroiled within this individual so that we don't know if they would automatically find it triggering or not or what this activity actually is. But recollection does have some amount of effect and cause and effect associated with it. So you're very right when we're analyzing it as such. Aditya, also, I think it's fair when you're analyzing this that Gov case would simply run the idea that there is probability that this association with this artist, or maybe they are talking along their communities and friend groups, and when they mention this artist, there's a larger likelihood that they're called out by other people also because this person might have probably been publicly considered because of the serious misconduct, which means that this information about this artist is widely available in public in terms of how their misconduct has occurred or what are the essential problems that they've done. So there are different perspectives, right? As a fan, what would be your motivations? You might have personal motivations into listening to good work which you enjoy. You might have motivation that you want to safeguard your own personal and professional interests. You might have a motivation that you want to do certain things which are going to be beneficial for you. So these motivations are what would be the bedrock of framing your arguments in this case. Very good. Okay, since we have reached the midway point of the workshop, let's take a quick 4 to 5 minute break, after which we can resume the second half and then we'll wrap up the workshop accordingly. Right. So in building arguments and actor motions, you have to always be consistent with the actor's voice and the actor's consistency in terms of how they are in the society and how they work in the society. So you have to be also very careful that you signpost these arguments very carefully by saying that what are the benefits that the actor is getting from that particular argument that you're trying to run. So for example, you might, if you are saying this is the economic benefit towards an actor, you would say that this is the economic thing that is going to be observed within the framework of the world, and I think this is the actor's prior motivations or goals behind this particular idea, and therefore I think this is beneficial for the actor. So, if you're providing specific context or identifying specific challenges alongside the actor's motivations, I think that makes it much more easier for your arguments to be taken into account by judges. And it becomes very easy for judges to also like give value towards how you're arguing in that particular actor motion as well. The second thing is you have to be very careful by identifying what kind of role frameworks that you need to associate with and what kind of things you need to do within your roles. For the prop case, you have to be very clear that you highlight the motivations of this actor from the get-go, explain why the actor would rationally want to be based on those circumstances that you're using from your framing, and then also prove what are the best interests of the actor so that you establish a certain amount of metrics or what is essentially the burden within the motion for that engagement to happen between both sides and for the debate to be valuable in terms of the room as well, right? If necessary, you can also outline models into how the actor would rationally work in terms of a policy framework, or in terms of how the actor might work in terms of interest that it has or that they have in terms of institutional pressures or institutional abilities or organizational pressures or goals and motivations, or maybe based on certain themes like economics and principles, which would be dependent on what type of motion setting that we have within that round. In the ops case, however, you can have some sort of like reprioritization of targets. Like you can say that the actor is motivated like apart from what the prop has mentioned in these things as well. And I think these things are much more beneficial. And you can propose an alternative course of action and explain why certain things need to be avoided on the actor's premise. So, as I always mention in a lot of cases, debate is sort of like a comparative sport, and then you have to provide a comparative case and weigh in both sides, right? So, you have to be very careful that you have analysis from both sides and you're careful in terms of understanding how you are addressing different issues from the perspective of the actor. So don't just leave your arguments in like a vacuum. Try to like base your arguments onto how it might look at for the op and how it might look at for the prop and why your side is doing better than the other side by clearly defining the terms and intents of the individuals, right? So your evaluation by a judge would be more critically done in terms of how you are most satisfying these particular aspects of linking your ideas back to the actor and linking your frameworks or arguments back to the interests and motivations of the actor to begin with. However, there are, of course, certain very common pitfalls that do occur in terms of, say, addressing these issues or addressing these particular aspects. Like, for example, there are points of biases, like you have individual biases which might creep in terms of analyzing specific actors. You might not like a particular individual, or you might not like a particular institution. You might not believe that a particular institution might work beneficially or not. So when you are debating actor motions, you have to be careful that you do not fall into those common pitfalls so that you can argue in a neutral perspective, which is beneficial towards your stance that you're taking. The other thing is you are not supposed to generalize your ideas or your arguments. What I essentially mean here is you have to look at this debate from the point of view of the actor, not from the point of view of an average good that is happening for the society. So that's something that you have to be very careful about. If you just randomly make a claim that this policy helps everyone without justifying why that policy claim will be something beneficial to the actor, or even if, say, you're making a principal claim, you don't tie it back as to why the principal claim will be beneficial to the actor, you will obviously have a problem in terms of the judge not giving you enough amount of credit for those things. Do not impose your value systems on them, and then also be very careful about characterizations that might be very vague when you're looking at arguments that you're trying to form for this actor. You have to be very logically clear and you have to be crystal clear in your structure as to how you're framing the arguments as well. Now, the other thing that we'll sort of discuss is that sometimes you would see that certain underlying things are of common interest to different individuals or actors. And sometimes debaters make this mistake of sort of giving that to all actors present in this particular set of motion or this particular theme of motions. So do not try to run stock cases without impacting those stock cases on the general interests and needs of the actor, which becomes very important for you to sort of understand what those motivations and goals of these actors are. Sometimes it is clear from the motion framing. Sometimes it is clear because they are popular actors in the world currently, or maybe very common institutions that are generally been there for a long period of time. And sometimes it's a bit more harder to make out, but context slides do help out or info slides do help out. So when you're doing prep also, let's just discuss a couple of strategies that you might take during prep time. In prep strategy, try to consider how actors have acted in the past. Examples might very well help you sort of like drum up the ideas and interests of this actor and understand how those logically coherent arguments can be made on the basis of the goals and interests that the actor presents to you. So what I essentially mean here is that if, for example, an IOC or an UN has taken an action in the past, it is far more likely that they have been doing so because of certain motivation that they exist within. So it's much more easier for you to justify a claim when you're saying that this example exists. So it is much more likely that the ideas or principles of that organization is aligning with, say, these things because of historically context dependent ideas or, say, historically proven situations which have been existing. So this could help you in prep as well in ideating what kind of goals and motivations does an actor have, or what kind of goals or motivations does your arguments want to address in terms of that actor. Another particular tip that I can give you is that when you are speaking in terms of argument frameworks, rebuttals sometimes get very messy in terms of how you are framing the ideas and framing the things around, say, this actor. And so that is something that you need to be careful. Rebuttal should not be generalized. Like, for example, if they're saying that the economic model is better suited to this actor, so this economic model should be followed. You cannot simply just generally put out like this economic model will fail or this economic model is less likely to be better without looking at, say, the interests of the stakeholder, which is the actor of this motion, right? And that is something that you need to prioritize in your discussions when you are rebutting your cases from the other side as well. So these are like the common things that you will have to look at in terms of practicing strategy. But more or less, that covers the basic idea about how you are going to analyze, structure, and work around actor motions or actor specific motions. So we'll quickly move on towards the concluding part. We'll have some question answers right now. If there are any questions, I'll open the floor for the audience. So please feel free to ask. I'm keeping an eye out on the chat also. So if you want to just drop in your messages on the chat, that is fine as well. Yes, Aditya.
What is that one takeaway that we can have from actor motions regarding our stakeholders in other debates?
Could you please repeat? I couldn't hear you.
What is that one takeaway, or like what are the takeaways from an actor motion which can be applied to stakeholders within other debates?
Simple. I think the idea is here how you're prioritizing interests of individuals, right? So instead of interests of individuals, you're prioritizing interests of stakeholders in a broader sense when you're looking at, say, other types of motions which are not actor motions. So sometimes this might look like prioritizing certain interests of the generalized community or the community as a whole. Who is more vulnerable? A minority group might be more vulnerable. So if a minority group was to be considered as an actor in terms of the framework of any, say, policy motion or motion around education or motion around society or motion around social movements or social upliftment, these give you a general perspective of how to like identify the best stakeholder to target and identify where you can actually impact better in the debate. So I think that is also something that you take away from actor motions and you're practicing actor motion that helps you a lot in identifying what kind of impact driven things that you can do in terms of our argumentation, but also what kind of like benefits or costs you can identify, which are more important in a debate setting. So that is something that you can be very careful and cognizant about in your analysis of other motion types aside from active motions. Any other questions?
Yeah, thanks. Just a like kind of a follow-up, not a follow-up, but a separate question. That is, in hypothetical motions where like the context slide has not cleared out what the characteristics of an actor might be,
Hmm.
what do we do in those cases?
You would need to have some amount of spec knowledge because I think there would not be a motion which would come up without, say, any sort of general relevance to what's happening around you right now, or any sort of like non-public figure which is sort of popular in media. So you won't randomly get somebody as random as John Foucault and then say what are the motivations of those actors without any clarifications. The other part is that you can always ask for clarifications in the motion. So, for example, who is this actor? Because you're not allowed to search the internet. So you might ask for a couple of things from the cap panel itself. It's not always likely that it's beneficial. The other escape is that you simply ideate about what are the common interests in that category in that category or in that theme, and then address those principally in terms of how the actors' motivations might be common to them. So, for instance, if it's the president of the United States, be it Barack Obama, Donald J. Trump, and if they're in their first terms, the common motivation would be to do well enough to get a second term. So those kind of things can be identified underlying as to how the framing of the motion is. So you'll always have a chance to sort of address those things very accurately and better off in terms of the world and the paradigm that you're existing in. So be careful in terms of ideating common themes or common ideas which can be possibly there. Uh, I hope that answers you, Aditya. Anything else?
Yeah, again, and okay, right, got that. Just a doubt. In certain, as far as debates I have done, certain debates, there are more principal arguments that are generally run as opposed to practical, and certain debates have a lot more practical arguments where the teams do not focus on principality. So, does the actor dictate what should I focus on more in these type of motions?
Sure. I think if it's a religious institution that you're debating from, that becomes a much better concern in terms of how you're principally going to showcase things. But for example, if you're debating on the idea of what UN does, in principle, US operates in certain ways, but that principle is always not possible because the practicality of applying that principle isn't always there. So if the principle is that they should provide humanitarian aid for all, it is in practice not always possible. If the principle is that they want to go and then stop conflict zones or maybe help conflict zones by keeping peacekeeping force there, it's not always possible because practically UNSC doesn't always allow forces to go into all countries. So you have to have like a balance. You have to prioritize what kind of thing is necessary where and how to ideate within that and how to necessarily like feel about different things. So you will get a feel of these things more that you practice these kind of motions. You'll also get an idea as to how you will be prioritizing principles over practical aspects or practical aspects over principle depending on how it is. It also depends on the wording of the motion towards a great extent. One, because, for example, if there is an economics related motion or versus a governance related motion versus an education related motions. In principle, everybody will agree that education is good, but it's more around the idea of how practically are you benefiting education towards the greater amount of people. So motion wording also plays a huge part in terms of how you're addressing things in terms of framing your debate, be it principally or practically. Anything else, Aditya?
Cool, thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? Great. Okay, this was a very short workshop. We didn't have like a huge amount of things that we could possibly discuss, except do a lot of practice. I will send in a list of resources to all of you at the end of the session, as well as all of the other things that are included within this. We'll also have a recording up on YouTube in a short while, and I'll share this recording with all of you. I hope that this workshop was good enough, and you all could get something out of it. Thank you. You can reach out to me personally at any time if you have any other queries as well. Thank you so much.